You've known where to go this whole time. You know where to go. You know where you want to go. You just have to give yourself permission to go, and tears will come and all of it, That's it. It's that simple. The realization of unbound consciousness, the realization that everything I've ever thought, everything I've ever dreaded, everything I've ever worried about, everyone I've ever desired, every condition I've ever thought I wanted to make myself feel better, all the positions I felt like I was in relating to those eventualities of life, all of that stuff is made out of the same substance. It is. It's consciousness. And it always has been. And when you realize that, realize meaning not just believe what I just said because it sounds good or you resonate with it a little bit, but actually like find yourself there to go, oh shit, oh my gosh, this is what they've been talking about the whole time? Wow. I know this place. I remember this in a way. I remember it without remembering. It's just this. It's so simple. There's not a damn thing you could imagine, remember, envision that's not already here. Because it is this already. Again, I'll use the projector analogy again. It's like sitting in a movie theater watching the movie of your life on the projector screen. There's characters, there's you, there's your partner, there's the boss, there's different things that happen. It could be a horror film, it could be a romance, it could be a porn, whatever. But you're watching this whole story and you are really identified with one of those characters. Things are happening and there's relationship between the characters and all that's happening and you're just really invested. Like, what's going to happen next? And, I hope they're okay. And I don't want to see that person again, right? All this stuff's happening. You're watching the screen. And then all of a sudden you're like, is this the most real thing that's happening? Could there be something more real happening than this? Could there be a more primary experience of reality than what I'm experiencing with the stories and the narratives and the investment in the narratives? And, in this analogy, it's kind of like you don't really realize you're in a theater. You're so transfixed on that story. It's like, well, wait a minute. I kind of feel like I'm back from the story somehow. Why do I feel separate from the story? Like, why does that story feel like it's out there and I'm here? You kind of get curious about it. It's like thoughts, right? You go, huh. And this is a big shift for some people or a big aha moment when they realize they have thoughts, when they realize like what a thought actually is and I can disidentify from one single thought. Some people, that's a big, big deal to do that. They're just so identified in thought, they don't realize it. And when they shift out of that, even for a moment, may not be like an awakening, but it's something, they're like, holy cow. Like it changes the way you experience things. Jewel, the singer Jewel talked about this pretty clearly in one of her videos. Someone is interviewing her or something, this happening to her. And really cool. And many other people I know have said this. To suddenly go, oh, wait a minute. That part of the analogy is like you're sitting in the theater and you realize like, oh my God, I've been so transfixed in the story. I didn't realize like it's out there. Like, it's like made of this, something, this, what are those things up there? So you start getting closer, right? This is when you start realizing like, well, wait a minute. What is thought? What is the mechanism of thought? So you get close to the screen and again, the edges of the characters start to blur out. It's like the edge of the shirt and the background. It's like, yeah, they're different colors, but the closer I get, the colors don't seem that different. And the edges are not nearly as sharp as they seemed before. And the closer I get, the colors start to be there's less contrast. And I noticed that all of the colors are sort of made out of this light. It's all light. It's primarily light, secondarily colored light. It's like a prism. The light shines through the prism and it separates into, colors and bandwidth. And those different colors and wavelengths allow us to make a story out of the world, right? This is like Donald Hoffman stuff. And now you're realizing like, wait a minute, this is light. And you get closer and it's like, it's almost hard to even see the color, right? It's just these dancing shapes and shimmering light patterns. And it's like, wow, that's kind of cool. And there's a bit of a release in that, in the sense that you just fundamentally know you're seeing reality more clearly. Someone was talking last night about, well, I don't want to talk about that because it was encircling, but if you see that a certain paradigm you've held rigidly in life is not what you thought it was suddenly, even if it's disruptive, even if you're like, oh shit, like, I don't know, you find out your partner's not who you thought they were. You find out your job didn't make you happy, even though you've been working years for it. Whatever, right? If you're disillusioned, it can feel like disorienting, uncomfortable, even really scary. At the same time, often people are like, yeah, and there's this sense that there's a truth to this. I'm seeing the disruption is really uncomfortable and it's illuminating something. I don't know and you often don't know what it is. I don't know what it's illuminating, but there's something that's showing me that's deeper, that's more interesting in a way. That's what it is to go, oh, it's light, right? Okay, I can see how the light turns into patterns, and I can see if I move at certain distances, interact with that screen in a certain way, and it has to be a certain way, right? If you're too close to the screen, there's just light. If you're not looking at the screen, it's nothing. If you're, out of the room, there's nothing there. So it is a sort of experience that requires you to have a certain distance and relationship with the screen and the light, right? And that's thought. You are actually actively participating in both creating your own problems and in trying to solve your own problems. You're actively participating in remembering a past and then extrapolating a self that's in the present in relation to that past. You're doing all of that, and it takes energy to do that. It takes effort. That's what I mean, that you have to be at a certain distance with thought. You're actually interacting with thought in a very specific way that no one taught you to do. You learn to do it yourself, and no one taught you that there's other ways to do it until maybe now, or when you learn about meditation or something. And it's happening all the day long. It's like so weird. This is what I wrote about in the book. Like, thoughts are so prominent. They're the most, we talk to our own thoughts more than anyone or anything. And yet we don't really talk about them outwardly very often. It's very interesting. It's like a hidden thing we do. And there's like a sense of shame built into it sometimes and all this weird stuff. And it's just light, right? It's just consciousness. There's nothing really happening there in the way we think it's happening, but there's something more interesting happening. There's something maybe bigger happening. So yeah, that's when we were like going, oh, it's light, right? And then the really fun part is, then this does kind of happen maybe in stages a little bit for some people, and sometimes it's just all at once. But the really fun part is when you're like, well, wait a minute. This light is shining on this screen. The screen is kind of reflective, right? It's like the reflective capacity of consciousness. You notice that? And you're like, well, what the hell is it reflecting? Or what's bouncing off that screen? It's the light, right? And then you can turn around and look into the light. This is an analogy, but in consciousness, it is something like that. And that part is usually what I would call awakening, because the turning into the light, what you're really doing is you're realizing fully, unequivocally, that not only were all the problems and solutions and people, the images you're placing over people you think you know, and futures and past and memories, not only is all that stuff made out of light, all of that the whole time has been pointing some arrow back to something here that you've never looked at. You've been scared to look at. Sometimes you feel shameful to look at, but you've never looked closely enough to realize, holy shit, that's also made out of light. It's all just light. There's no separate self in that world struggling with the world and problems and solutions. That's all just created in some way magically out of this space of consciousness, just to have a personal experience, I guess. But when that experience becomes so uncomfortable, then you start turning around and going, well, what the hell is all this made out of? And when it's all just that light, then it's like, not much to say. Words just stop here. When it's all just consciousness, then words just are unnecessary and thoughts are unnecessary. And the funny thing then is the thoughts can be there or not. It doesn't matter at all. But as I described in the guided meditation, to sort of remind yourself of this, which you usually have to do, and meditation's a good way to do it, you kind of remind yourself by orienting toward thought. Because again, keeping that distance from the screen is a specific, this is how I tie it into the other stuff I was talking about. That orientation to the screen at a certain distance that's required for you to stay engaged in thought in an identified way. Keep telling yourself that internal story and narrative. And then interface with other people that are seeing like a different movie, but they also think it's the same, but it's made out of the same conditioning. So it has the same distance, it has the same types of characters, it has the same director. You actually believe you're watching the same movie, and you all believe it's real. That when you're talking to people, it's hilarious, which it kind of explains why we can feel really inauthentic talking to people, right? It's like bizarre that this is even happening, but it is, right? And now you have access to that light. You have access to that luminous consciousness at any time. And it's profoundly transformative, really. It was for me. And I still sit in it, when I meditate sometimes. It's just that unbound consciousness, and it is rather oceanic. And with that final realization, with that final shift where you look into the light and something about who you were taking yourself to be in the space of that thought distance, that the thinker, something fundamentally changes. That's why I say this is an identity shift primarily. And now what identity feels like or what you take it to be can be varied. Everyone's a little different with this. Many people it's like identity just isn't an issue anymore. Like before, you felt like it was a you, and a very struggling you that was like trying to figure it out, and there was like so much struggle and so many thoughts, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's just not interesting now. There's just this experience of a sort of oceanic being, at one level or another. You can see the conditioning sometimes trying to rev back up, and the thoughts can be sticky, but you never really believe them anymore. You might kind of get entangled in them here and there, you will, but you also never really believe them. It's very interesting that happens, and that's what we're talking about. So what you're doing is you're breaking that fundamental tendency to orient within consciousness in such a way that you can become identified and remain identified with thought. That's what that awakening is. And that's what the practice is that I'm talking about. It doesn't even matter if you've had that shift or awakening, you can still orient to the practice in the way I'm talking about. And that practice could lead to that shift as well. As I mentioned in the guided meditation, a component of this that really helps is true, authentic curiosity. If you really become curious about the mechanism of thought and identifying with thought, and all these things I'm saying about the fact that everything you've ever thought about the world is made out of this consciousness, which is inherently here, inherently the center of experience. And yet, how do I get entangled in a thought? Do I get entangled in a thought? Who gets entangled in a thought? How does that mechanism work? Like, just looking at that internally is fascinating. It really is fascinating. I don't know if most of the sages in history kind of came into this through that process or that kind of curiosity, but I sort of suspect so. It's usually the first thing people notice when they start becoming interested in spirituality, awakening, and that is like something about thoughts, something about the way I'm identifying with thoughts is off, But regardless of how one comes into this space, how one comes into becoming interested, genuine curiosity really does take you deeper into these insights because maybe because it's kind of a reversal, it's 180 degrees reversal from the usual. And the usual feels more like aversion to life, aversion to thoughts, aversion to emotions, aversion to situations, people, certain people, all of the things, right? There's the fourth and fifth fetter is kind of like desire and ill will, or you could interpret it as desire and aversion. In my experience and investigations in all this, I think aversion is the primary movement of struggle, reactivity, discomfort, dysphoria in life. It's an aversion of some sort. You're pushing something away, pushing a thought away. One time I was interacting with a guy, really nice guy, who had probably some form of like severe depersonalization, but he had a very empty mind, very clear, empty mind. Very sharp guy, good cognitive skills and so forth, but his mind just became kind of empty. No thoughts. He'd say, I have no thoughts. But it was extremely distressing, or at least that's what he would say, right? It's extremely distressing. But it's interesting, if you're around him, he didn't look like he was in distress. Just so you know, he looked like a very relaxed, present guy, but he would say it's rather distressing. I remember talking to him for quite a while, and I was really pointing in this way, because I think this is what I'm talking about, I really think is the cure, if you can get what I'm saying, to like DPDR, derealization, depersonalization, those kinds of experiences, because those are the extreme opposite of what I'm saying. Those are pushing the screen so far away that you don't see it anymore. That's not the same thing at all. Right? Not at all. And some people have a tendency to do that very easily. A defense mechanism, a coping mechanism. Anyway, so as I was talking to this guy and I was kind of pointing in this way, and I was really pointing him back to his thoughts ultimately. I'm pointing him back to the thought that says I have no thoughts. That's the thought. Like, that's the thought he was identifying with. Because there's always if there's discomfort, there's always identification. You're always either identified with something or you're trying to identify with something. When I say trying, I mean like deeper realization, when there's no apparatus for identifying, but the orientation is still trying to operate. But for the most part, if you're feeling discomfort, there's identification going on. Like dysphoria, that kind of angst, that kind of suffering, unsatisfactoriness. So yeah, I was trying to help him through this process, see. And all of a sudden, he just had this huge release, started crying and all this, and he was laughing and crying. He's like, for years, I've been pushing the thought away that says I have no thoughts. I've been so scared of that thought that I'm pushing it away. And that was causing a big part of it. There was other stuff underneath it, trauma, and he did trauma work later. But that was a big realization. It's really fascinating, isn't it? So that's why orienting toward thought. What is the thought right now? What is the thought that's catching me? What is the thought I'm identifying with? What is the thought that feels so familiar that I don't know it's a thought? I am fill in the blank. What are you? I am always trying to figure out awakening and I can't do it. I am the one that works really hard. I am the one that fails. I'm the one that's so sensitive. Life is hard. I don't know what it is. I probably had all those. I'm just throwing them out there. But what is the thought you're identifying with such that you don't even realize it's a thought? Yeah. And this is a practice that is really good even as realization deepens, because they get more subtle. Those thoughts get more subtle. Those perceptions, those ways of looking at the world get more subtle. I can tell you some of mine, even in deeper realization, that didn't really have a personal aspect, but they had a major impact on the way I talk about this. For one, it was like realization requires a lot of work. It's got to be hard and painful and maybe long, like somewhat long, time consuming. I didn't think it was like lifetimes kind of thing, but it was like, probably takes years for sure, which is really weird when I look back. For me, it didn't actually. It took years of suffering, and maybe that was the work. But when I figured out the process, it actually didn't take long. But then I did a bunch of Zen, and it was like one of those thoughts I didn't realize was a thought. It was a perception I didn't realize was a perception. What changed it was just doing this, actually, working with people and watching people just wake up like, popping off like, I don't know what, just not everybody does, but some people definitely do. Also understanding the surrender aspect, the feminine aspect of awakening and realization is very important. And some people just wake up by just absolute surrender. They know how to do it. They know what's there. They just have somehow avoided it. Sometimes I've people who are really intuitive, really in the feminine aspect, and I'll just say, you've known where to go this whole time. You know where to go. You know where you want to go. You just have to give yourself permission to go, and tears will come and all of it. That's it. It's that simple. You've already know. You've known. Now, this doesn't land for everybody. For some people, it's like they're in their mind going, wait, what's he talking about? Is he talking about this? Doesn't mean you're hopeless. It may take a little longer, but for some people, it's just, I guess it's just easier to disidentify from thoughts and just go directly towards that intuition. That's what I'm pointing to when I say, you know where to go. You already know where to go. You already know where you want to go. You know where your intuition is taking you when you're oriented to truth. When the statement, I just want to know what's true regardless of what that does, regardless of how it feels. I just want to know truth. I really do. I want to embody truth. And I know that that's going to dispel a lot of my illusions, and that's what I want. If that statement makes sense to you, then what I'm saying does relate to you in some way, even if it's not right in this moment. There may be a moment at some point where you're like, this is it. This is where I can turn toward that. I know it's there. And then there's no distance. It's not like you go somewhere. Something happens that I can't talk about. It's like magic or mystical. I don't know. But yeah, to kind of round that out, the first time you realize that holding a rigid orientation, an aversion to what we call life, but it's not life, it's thoughts, holding it out there, trying to manage it. Oh, I got to fix this. I got to make this better. I got to be more of this. I got to make that person understand me. I got to work harder at this. And, just like struggling with what seems like a world and an inner world and outer world, all that. When you realize all that struggle is made out of something very simple. It's holding a certain orientation in regard to thought. That's all it is. How this lands for you and how this works for you may be different than the way I'm saying it, but you can probably feel and tune into it, that you are holding a certain distance from thought, or you have a certain relationship with thought that's allowing it to feel real in a way that feels compelling and at the same time dysphoric, uncomfortable, unsatisfactory. That's the key. It's like, no, but this is real. This really is my problem. I really do have to solve this problem. Okay, also, how do you feel when you think that? Like, shit, yeah, I know. Stop. You have to just be honest with yourself that, yeah, I know all this struggle and doership and fucking like effort. I know it feels like compelling and like, no, but it's gotta be, you gotta do this. You gotta do it this way. It's gotta be this way. It's like, okay, that's fine. That's part of your reality. How do you feel thinking and feeling that? Kind of like crap. Kind of like I'm not okay right now. Kind of like not settled right now. Great. Stop thinking it. Stop doing that. Now, what is all that made out of? What is the struggle made out of? Like, see it, just see it, feel it, look at it, orient to it. And it's automatically that luminous, unbound consciousness. It is, it just is. It's all it is. Everything you've thought, everything you've thought you were, everything you've wanted to be, everything you failed at, everything you succeeded at, every form of thought you could ever conjure or imagine, scary, not scary, images in the mind, flashes in the mind, memories, it's all consciousness. It's all this. Some people will say this is home, right? And it is home for the storyteller, because now the storyteller can just blend into the story in a way that's not reactive. It's just ocean, an ocean of aliveness, being, call it what you want. Knowingness, I like that term. Knowingness without an object or subject of knowing. It's a great practice. It's a good practice. To intentionally practice this. Someone, John Tan in Awakening to Reality blog described it as leading himself back through the statement, anywhere and everywhere there is, that is me. That worked for him. And that's exactly this. Anything, anywhere, time, spaces. It's all the me sense. It's all the same. It's all ocean. You can't you can't get lost here. I'll say it that way. You can't get lost here. You can't seek here. And you really can't have aversion here. Strangely. It's just like more of this. I hesitate to call it centeredness, but some people make it feel like a centeredness. But it can also feel centerless for sure. Maybe fullness, boundlessness. And then this other thing I'm going to say, this is, again, hold it lightly. You may not experience like this, and you don't have to. It can feel like anything. It's not a specific way, so don't use this as a litmus test, but it can definitely feel wave-like big waves, like big undulate. Like for me, I can tell you right now, it's like, but it doesn't feel like it's the body at all. It feels like something vast, oceanic. And I don't know if that's real or unreal, imagined or not. I don't know if anyone else can experience it, but it doesn't matter. It has that totality to it. It's just experiential. It's like the pure experience of consciousness. You start to feel how consciousness moves. You could say consciousness is the carrier wave of every other wave of experience. And yeah, I really think When this first was realized in 1997, instantaneously I knew it. I don't know why I knew it, but I still kind of perceive it this way, that this is really what people want, what they want. They want to come home to this. And you can see it in every thought. Every thought, it's like, do you want the content of the thought directing you to another thought, another thought, another thought, another thought, such that you're always struggling, trying to keep up with life, thoughts and all this? Or do you want to realize it's all just this already? It's all just you already. It's all just here already. And you cannot get lost here. And I think what I meant by everyone wants this, it's not like knowing what people really want. It's more like seeing that all wanting is already made out of this anyway. Wanting is just one thing it can do. Wanting is one wave on the cosmic ocean of everythingness. So want all you want. Just don't believe it too much.